Hello, this is Karen Johnson, and we're here for another version of our Proctors Historical Collection, sponsored by the History Committee. This is an effort to preserve the history of Proctors by interviewing key people in its history. And today we are very fortunate in that we have John Scherer and Audrey Hughes, who are here to talk about the formation of the History Committee, and they themselves have had a major role in it. So let's start out with John, and I just might mention this is December 18th, 2017. We're getting near the end of the year, but this is our last and our best interview, I'm sure. John, how did you get involved in the History Committee?
Well, that's a good question, because I've been trying to remember that. And I know Audrey's the one that got me involved. She was at the time public relations person for the museum. And I had just completed an exhibit for the New York State Museum called From Music Halls to Movie Palaces. It was a traveling exhibit that traveled throughout the state. And I had just written a catalog for it, and I had a talk on the history of popular entertainment from 1850 to 1920. And somehow I put together a two-part lecture series which was offered at Proctors, and I don't know whether I did that through the museum or through the State University, but the venue was at Proctors Theater, so there must have been some collaboration with the theater. And this must have been, it was in the 1980s, that I'm sure of, and I'm thinking it's about 1985, maybe 86. And I did those lectures here on the mezzanine area of Proctors.
Right where the Guild Room is now, basically.
Right. And I don't know, did you go to those lectures, Audrey?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yes. And I think it was after one of those lectures that Audrey said, well, we have a historical committee, would you like to join it?
Not would you like, would you please?
So yes, I think that was my first.
That was your introduction.
Yeah, and I remember, and I think the historical committee had been formed several years before that.
Yes, it was. It was. And right at the beginning, it was a board committee. It is not now. It's now an independent committee. There were two committees then that were part of the board of trustees. The facilities committee, which Jim Lamel held.
Forever.
Chairmanship, yeah, right.
Wonderfully.
And our history. And Billy Pemberton was a member of the board and on the board, and so she chaired the first history committee. Now, when I first started out as public relations director, which I have said before, there was very little known about Proctor's theater, this theater. I mean, when you're doing press releases and you're talking about something and you don't know anything about it, where do you go? So Francis Poulin was the city historian. He came, and between the two of us, my being on staff and then working with, and then I don't know whether the committee was formed after we decided to do more delving into the history, and then it was a board committee, or whether it was already in existence. That I don't know with Billy. But anyway, the committee worked in the beginning as a committee of the board.
And did it have something to do with the museum? The
No, the museum came afterwards. The museum came in 1983. And it was done through the Junior League. We did have members on our history committee that were members of the Junior League. In fact, we had what's his name? Old dwarf. What's his name?
Larry Hart.
Larry Hart was on our committee. We had Junior League people. We had many Harvey.
Wayne Harvey.
We had a great, we had a great member.
He had a special suit,
yes.
Yellow rose.
Right.
He was great.
That was the beginning, and so we were delving more and more into finding out more about what this theater was in its total picture.
And in fact, it was, I think the museum had been open for maybe about a year when I joined
That's right.
the committee.
That's true, because yeah, it was 83,
Yeah.
and it was named in honor of Kay Rosendahl, who was one of the first presidents of.
And also very active in the junior league.
In the junior, yes, it was.
It met everybody's
Okay.
needs.
Right, right.
And I remember Billy Pemberton was the chair, I believe,
Yes, she
when
was.
I
Yes.
got in. And Billy was a great person. I really enjoyed her sense of humor. She had a very dry sense of humor. We had a good time with Billy.
So that was our early. That's how we came into existence.
So
then.
the earliest things you did were what?
Oh, I remember we did after I got involved anyway, we did a tour. Remember, we did the theater tour, a bus tour we put together. And we went to the Troy Music Hall and the Palace Theater and then Proctors. And we actually got off the buses.
And Troy, in Troy,
Well,
Proctors in Troy.
Well, no, that was the committee went to visit
No,
that. I don't think we didn't see that on the
Oh,
bus
you're right,
trip.
you're right. I take that back, you're right.
But it was those three theaters, and then we ended here at Proctor's, and we had a big
Lunch on
reception
stage.
on the stage.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah, that was open to the public too. It wasn't just our committee.
Right. I
was,
think
we
wasn't it like a
sponsored that.
fundraiser? We
Yeah, I think-
sold tickets,
yeah,
and I
right,
know
that's
Francis Poulon and I did a lot of history stuff on the.
Well,
I think we had two buses. I think Francis was on one bus and I was on the other bus.
Yeah, and then we visited Proctor's estate down in Pretoria. We've tried to educate ourselves as a committee, trying to learn more about the whole theater picture and Mr. Proctor himself. So we made a trip down and made connections with his estate in which was
Right,
then part of West Point.
That came a little later.
That came
But I
later.
remember that the committee, we went and visited Proctor's in Troy.
Yes, we did.
And we were so surprised because the auditorium was open to the sky at the time.
Yeah.
And then we arranged sort of exchange programs with other theater groups. I remember going to Utica to visit the Proctor's Theater there, the Stanley, and they gave us a tour of that.
Yeah.
And then that theater group came here, and we reciprocated.
Right. Now, our main purpose, we were talking about the Rosendahl Museum in '83. When the Junior League put that in, it was with the understanding that the History Committee would then docent the museum. So that is our mission, even though it was initiated by the Junior League. It is our responsibility as a committee to docent that museum and keep the displays going. And that's one of our positions too. And then also cataloging and archiving and this has been done by members of our committee and who have absolutely spent hours, thousands of hours, going through all the things that we have collected, posters and collections and memorabilia, and so we have it all organized and stored in its proper.
And this is sort of comparatively recent too, because I remember one of the things we tried to do early on was add a bit of professionalism to the museum. And we had an intern from Siena College who came to catalog the collection. And I remember because they needed some supervision, of course, and at the time I was working out of Rotterdam, so I would come down lunchtime to tell her what she needed to be doing and to check what she was doing. And that sort of got us started with the catalog. And I think that Marianne Lamelle's daughter had also gone through all of the shows that were here at Proctor's and composed a catalog.
The vaudeville shows.
Of the vaudeville shows, yes. So we have a nice catalog of all the vaudeville shows that appeared here.
And that has come in handy because somebody will come through. Our museum, is open before the shows and an intermission and so forth. And people will come in and they'll say to you, they'll say, my relative performed here. Can you look it up and see if they, so we have the card catalog or whatever, and we can find out, what did they perform under, how did they do, so that's interesting.
And one of the other things that we were used for is I know that they consulted the historical committee when they were making changes to the theater as to appropriate design and materials. so that it would be compatible with the historical aspect of the theater. Do you remember? I think we were consulted on designs of the carpets and and some of the lighting fixtures and
then when something is happening,
like
we panic. The marquees, are you going to take down the vaudeville marquee? No, you can't do that. You know, we think.
What about the apostrophe?
I was going to say
that's
so
a story in itself. Oh, that really broke my heart to take out the apostrophe in Proctors, because Proctor is one man. He could have many theaters, but only one Mr. Proctor. But you know, technology and
you're a grammarian. That's the problem.
Yes, that's true.
The people in charge now are marketers.
They're marketers. Anyway,
and we've got apostrophe back
yes.
in terms of the.
And I thought that was great. Philip named the cafe the apostrophe downstairs.
The missing apostrophe.
Missing apostrophe. So that eased all our hearts that we got the apostrophe back.
You could have a few laughs.
Right. But I want to go back to the collections, because it's our job to amass as much as we can about the past history. And we have playbills, and we have the show booklets and posters and flyers. But getting, what do you call it, hard copy to three-dimensional objects?
Right.
That's important.
Yes, and I remember the early years of the Historical Committee, one of those, so many memories. But I remember one of the second or the third meeting I attended, one of the members was Maureen O'Sullivan.
Yes, yes.
Mrs. Cushing. And she was this matronly lady, and I had no idea who it was until after the meeting, and somebody said, "Did you know that was Maureen O'Sullivan?" Oh, I didn't. And they, she and her husband, Mr. Cushing, donated $1,000 to have some films in our collection.
The nitrate film.
Nitrate films restored, and that was a big plus, because those are very important films. One was a General Electric promotional film from the 1940s or early 50s,
yeah.
And the other was a film on the opening of the
Plaza.
The Plaza Theater. Yes,
yeah.
and they're wonderful films.
That's Jim Cushing. He was a very important philanthropist in Schenectady, and also a businessman, and a good egg.
And now, in the museum right now, donated to us on loan, is their marriage certificate, framed. Did you see that?
I did see that.
It's beautiful. So anybody going in the museum, look on the wall.
You have everything. What's the oddest thing you think you have?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Probably some vaudeville.
What about some cigars from George Burns?
Oh, yes, they say that was a George Burns cigar. That would be, I guess, one of the oddest things,
Yeah,
right?
I had one in my freezer for a while. But
Did you really?
Yes.
It truthfully was his?
Oh, yeah, because I was on the stage the night he was here, but it deteriorated very seriously, so...
That's right.
I don't know what happened to it.
Yeah, and that's how the one we have in the museum collection was one that was picked up off the stage.
Is that right?
When he appeared, yes, that's how we know it was George Burns' cigar.
Well, the very first...
When he was almost 100.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Now, the very first collection, well, there are two things that stand out in my mind. It's very early. It's in the museum on display, and it's always on display there. There was a first Proctors, the vaudeville Proctors was 1912 till 1926 when this theater was built. Mr. Proctor rented that theater. It was down behind the Strand Theater, or what's the theater on the corner of Erie Boulevard?
Liberty?
State?
The State Theater. It was behind, and it overlooked the Erie Canal. Mr. McGee, I forget his name now. Anyway, Proctors leased that theater, and someone found the program for the opening of that 1912 theater in a book in their attic. Now, that's how things are found. And this was on tapestry. It was printed on a silk piece of tapestry. We have that framed. We have that in the museum all the time, because that is so 1912. And that's how things are found. We have a few other things that have been found in booklets.
Recently, we got the first program for the opening of this theater too, which was donated.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I think that was, yeah.
Just this last year, we acquired that.
And that appeared in the window after a short time, didn't it?
Yes.
It's in the historical, the big historical display on the 90th year. It's now in hand so everybody can read it. The original is kept under lock and key because it'll deteriorate.
So you can't really come to Proctor's without seeing some of the collections in the arcade.
Oh no, that's
in
right.
the window that you.
That's right.
So you have to have many talents. You have to have a cataloging talent and a visual talent.
And the museum membership is open to anybody, and we have about 15 or 20 members. Some are docenting and some are not, depending on their availability. So it's a mixture of young and old and medium, people who are retired, people who are working. Anybody interested in
And speaking of artifacts, again, I remember those early years when I was attending the meetings. We took a tour of the sub-basement of Proctor's. I don't know if you remember that or not. And we discovered this throne-like chair down there. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the original pieces of furniture from the theater lobby. Yep. And we rescued that, and it's currently on exhibit in the museum. And we've since found a number of other matching chairs to that
You just find them in the building somewhere?
Yes, we went on a tour of the building looking for things. Yeah. The other things that we acquired are the dressing tables, the old dressing tables, and mirrors. Yeah. Just by going around the theater and looking for some of these older things.
And then when the theater was being widened and the stage was being widened, the old call board for the vaudeville call board, which was outside the green room in the old, before it was torn down, we had that saved, so that's on display at many times. So we have big items and we have little items. Now I just want to mention the first collection that we ever got was called the Schilling Law Collection. And Bob Warlock was the director of operations then, and he had a lot of contacts with a lot of people. And this gal, her name was Bates, as a child, her father was the film editor for the Times Union. It was the predecessor of the Times Union, the journal. What do we say that was? Albany Journal. And he would bring home these glossy stills to his daughter. Now they date back to the 1920s, 30s, and they were all the Barrymores and Theda Bara and all the old silent film stars. And you can't get glossies today. Now those are a thing of the past too, with the new technology. So that was one of the she had this collection, and she was getting on in age herself. So she approached Bob Warlock and said, "Would you like this collection?" Well, you should see the collection. It's 2 pages long of black and white stills of all these famous, and we have used them in promotions and in displays. That was our first big, really solid collection.
And of course, we also are responsible for retaining the archives of Proctor's history too. The whole business of acts, restoring the theater and what was going on, and we have all of that material. And what really was a big boon to the historical committee is when the theater was able to give us some space for storage, because all we had initially was a little closet off of the museum. The museum, by the way, is
former bathroom. No.
Yes,
this was the,
you're right.
This was the long, skinny room, whatever that was.
And the room that's the museum used to be the theater manager's office. Right. So it's a small space. So we were quickly, in fact, we very quickly outgrew the closet, and we needed space. And that did become available when they acquired the Key Bank next door. And we have storage space now on the 2nd floor of that building. And so then we had room to actually work on the collections and catalog them. And we continue to get new volunteers for the historical committee. And we got a couple of volunteers now who are really organized, I'm very pleased to say. And they've done a wonderful job in cataloging the collection. It's on the computer now.
Yeah, we know exactly what the name of the well, we have a lot of signed autographs, or what the show was, how many copies we've got, whether it's signed, whether it was an individual photo, whether it was in with a show. Got all of that. It goes on and on.
So this is a list.
This is the
But
catalog.
it
Everything that's been
refers
cataloged.
to a location
Yep.
as well as
Yes.
Where it's
cross-reference.
filed and how and what it is, whether it's a TV, whether it's a Broadway show, whether it's whatever.
We're using archival material
whether the
to
poster's
store
been
them in.
That's kind of
whether
new,
the poster's
isn't it?
signed or not. We have all the posters, whether they've been signed, the names of the show, the individuals, the performer, the signed the posters, all of that.
And we had to do a lot to this storage area because it was full of stuff. It had to be cleaned
Yeah.
up.
Right.
And another volunteer on our committee, Ed Grinter, was good in that kind of stuff.
without Ed.
With
One of
carpentry
our
and stuff, and he was able to really make that
producers and-
space usable.
Yeah, he's one of our producers and
Yes.
helpers on this show, and
And another
great.
big collection we just received in this past year was the Audrey Kuppenberg and Rob Edelman collection, again through Bob Warlock. He worked with them in the movies, and they're both from State University. He's on PBS at Rob Edelman, and we have big posters framed of all the big shows. We have one now, a big display on Kirk Douglas because he's turning 100, and we have one of Spartacus. It's huge, all framed, of Kirk Douglas, and we have many posters and so forth of shows through the years that are in the arcade. That's another thing. You mentioned the arcade. That's our responsibility too, is to have maintain the display. And so we've kept the one, now it's the history of the 90-year celebration. And we work with other groups in the theater too, like the Guild was for their big gala. We helped put things out to make it festive, you know, and through the museum. And we work with other groups to, whenever they're doing like ghost tours or walking tours or of the theater, whenever they need us, we're there to help.
so even though it's a different committee, you're closely associated with the
Absolutely.
tour guides.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, well, tour guide committee. Marilyn Sassy is head of the tour guide. She's a member of our committee, and she reports. It's not under us now.
It's a
The tour
lot
guides.
for a small group to do when you think about it.
And we've done some great programs. A couple of years ago, we did the vaudeville show.
Yes, we
here.
did brevities. We had a whole history of vaudeville. That was a fundraiser, and that was
And
very
we've had some-
successful.
And we've, I remember, again, shortly after I got into the committee, do you remember we were on a radio show and we interviewed the niece of
Durand.
of
Yeah,
Proctor,
yeah.
Proctor's niece?
Yes,
yeah.
yes. That was a celebration of the Proctors 40, I don't know what, it was one of the,
We have a lot of anniversaries we celebrate.
with a 2, now this is then, it was 2-hour radio, Bob Cudmore was the host.
That was it.
2-hour radio show of all of Proctor's history up until that point. And Margie Durant, Merle Durant was Proctor's grandniece. And she, my husband and I stopped to visit her on our way to Florida one time. And I did have, and I had a copy made of that 2-hour show. Unfortunately, it is misplaced and I cannot find it.
But like many historical documents, it may show up again.
I'm praying. Believe me, I'm praying. I thought I loaned it to somebody, and whoever I loaned it to, if you're out there, look and see if you've got it.
And in the same vein, our whole committee went down and visited the Proctor's estate in
Yeah.
Harriman. We were invited by a
we
member of
mentioned that,
the
we mentioned it.
Historical
Yeah, right.
Society.
And we just got,
And there's been some give and take between us
Yeah.
and them. They've loaned some things to us, and we've given them some material.
yes, and we
So that was
get a lot
very
of things on
interesting.
loan too. Now his connection with the New York State Museum, when we have displays, like we had Peter Pan, and we have all the first, you know.
Yeah, because the State Museum has a big theater collection, so we
or
made
anything
use
else.
of that.
We have a
Vaudeville
circus,
performers.
and we have someone on our committee who's an authority in circuses, and so he's been very helpful in working with
But
circuses.
he's also a great carpenter. I think that's the wonderful part, because to be a historian, you seem to need many talents.
Yes, that's absolutely
Because
right.
he's got a piece that helps interpret the circus. And
Yeah, Gordon Turner.
Oh, yeah,
and
he's very
and
creative.
in the
Yeah.
window, it's wonderful because
yes.
it gives you the third dimension.
That's right. If you look in the window, you'll see that his work with the.
And besides
circle.
collecting materials for the museum and stuff, we also do an oral history program, which of course this is part of. But one of the more interesting interviews that we've done was Ray Norton, who was one of the first organists here at Proctors Theatre. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And I think, Karen, that was largely through you that we got to meet Ray Norton. He was at a nursing home nearby, and I went out there and talked to him and listened to him. And then we had him come and appear on stage here at Proctors. Right. And we had all of the news media here, the newspapers, television.
Have it on tape. We have it on tape.
And we had someone from the State Museum videotape the whole thing as well. And we interviewed him on videotape. So
there's no stone that goes unturned in trying to find this historical material.
No, and we just people listening or watching this, we just ask you, don't throw anything away. Ask us if we want it, because it could be something that's very valuable. For example, just this year we received, again, we have the big display of Kirk Douglas. A woman came through, her mother went to school with Kirk Douglas, had the yearbook signed by Kirk, and so she donated the yearbook. It's now on display in the museum with the whole Kirk Douglas display, and his name and all his bio stuff and all the things he was involved in. He went by a different name then. He was very popular. He went by a different, didn't go by Kurt. It was another nickname that he had. And so just that simple little book, the yearbook, you know. And we got the table. We got a chair back this year that was taken. It was customary. Phil Rapp. When he was a theater manager, when he left, he was able to. They were able to take some of the things the theater was, you know. So he had a chair, and so his son had the chair. His father's dead now, and he brought the chair back, and we have now that in the museum. So little things like that.
Vaudeville material. We've gotten a couple of things from local vaudevillians who played here at Proctors.
Yes, we have.
And we had a whole exhibit of this one vaudevillian, I think it was from Glens Falls.
No, Boston Spa.
Okay, loaned us some material, and we had a whole exhibit on the museum.
Oh, and also, yeah, that reminds me, my neighbor, Kathy and Bob Steigerwald in Burnt Hills, who lived across the street. They were from Attica, New York. Their parents stored a vaudeville trunk for a friend. They never played Proctors, but he was in vaudeville and out in the central part of the state. Her parents died. So Kathy had it stored in her house in Cedar Lane across the street from me. And she said, this vaudeville trunk should go to Proctors. And it is, we use that all the time. If you've ever seen a vaudeville trunk, it's huge.
And
there's all the drawers.
It looks like a pirate truck.
It's,
for money.
But there's no better symbol of a vaudevillian than suitcases in a trunk, because they were constantly on the road, going from theater to theater. And that's what it was all about. The theaters were all looking for fresh talent, and they had to be continually traveling.
We could go on for hours.
So let's just talk about the museum and when it's open and what you might see if you go in there and where it is, just to summarize.
Okay, well, also I just wanted to mention that we also we're collecting current material as well, like the posters of performances that are being held at Proctors now, and they get autographed by the cast. So we have a whole collection of this going back to when the theater reopened in 1979. So that's another valuable collection.
All right, so the museum itself, the theater museum, which we docent before, for their shows, it's open before the show, and it's open at intermission. And sometimes it's open if you're still there. People stop by afterwards as they're on their way out if you're still open. So that's
but the arcade's always open. People can see those exhibits all the time.
Is that what you asked?
Well, no, I just wondered, if I go in there right now, your feature, is Kirk Douglas up there?
Kirk Douglas?
It's it's actors and performers who came from the Capital District.
Okay.
So we have David Hyde Pierce, who are some of the
Well,
Kirk Douglas is the big.
Well,
the
we have
big
one whole
feature.
display on Kirk Douglas.
Maud Adams, who was a very early actress, and she was the first Peter Pan in 1906.
And Ann B. Davis, she was
came
head
from the
local
Catskills,
connection.
and she's in there.
She's in there.
Ann B. Davis, right?
And William Devane. I lived next door to William Devane, the actor.
With the lady from Troy.
Must have set your fate. William Devane.
William Devane.
Yeah, I can't think of her name. The lady from Troy.
You know.
Maureen
Stapleton.
That's it.
Maureen Stapleton, yes.
Right.
And
Do we get a prize for this?
Yes. Yeah, memory. Talk about memories.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, what
so
I
we
was
pulled out.
It's a good place if you do have questions about something you might have and wish to give to the theater.
Yeah.
It would be a place where you could contact a person and just discuss it.
We have a little book in the museum that's just for that. Anybody coming in who has any connection. My grandfather was a vaudevillian. Here's the connection. Here's my phone number. Or here, reach me, call me. I have this, I have that. I'd like to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So anybody coming into the museum, we try to record that.
So we can follow up.
Any docent will take that information, so we can follow up.
So
Or
if you wanted to join the committee, if you can remember Audrey Brown Hughes's name, you can call her directly, or just call Proctors, and we
They'll
would
call
give
Proctors.
a referral.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of material comes to us because people call Proctors and then it gets referred to.
But I'm
Yes.
looking for bodies too, because you have all those tours and all
Oh,
those
yes.
We do, and we do need people to keep. We're getting on in age ourselves, and we need people to come and
Speak for yourself.
all right. Don't rub it in.
Oh,
don't rub
dear.
it in. We're related. We found out we're related.
This show is going right into trouble, I can see. So we need people for the history committee.
Yes.
We need more historic memorabilia. We would give anybody or group a tour, a special tour.
Absolutely.
And basically, we're charged with preserving the history of the theater and for interpreting the entertainment when it was live, popular entertainment, before.
And as I
television
always say,
and radio.
yesterday was history, so we're not going way back. And we're talking about what they're doing with the youth today. That's in another month. That's really, that's history.
One of the major collections we didn't mention was the Anderson collection.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah,
And we'll have another show, and we'll do show and tell on it. How's that?
Because this guy used to come to the theater
Always.
and all the time to Proctors, and he'd wait at the stage door to get autographed photographs of performers, and all of this collection that he amassed was donated, and that's another major collection.
We'll stop now because we could go on.
Yes, I
We
can
could go
tell.
on and on.
I might mention that June and Ed Grinter, our producers of
Oh,
this
yes,
show,
yes.
are tour guides, and they
Also, we're on Ann Perillo's show too.
Yes.
A member of our committee is on every month to talk about some form of history of Proctors. So we're on Ann
I
Perillo.
guess you'd say we have a very active committee.
Yeah, right. Mhm.
But it's a lot of fun. I attend
Absolutely.
a lot of the meetings, and I'm amazed at
Oh,
the commitment
always.
and the skills of the group. And you don't have to have all those skills because
No.
it could be a learning opportunity for you too.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank John Scherer and Audrey Brown Hughes for being with us today on December 18th, 2017. I want to thank our producers who are thick into the production of this show, June Grinter and Ed Grinter, who handles all the heavy-duty work, I would say. Make sure we don't get in trouble, and June, who's on that phone and computer, making sure that everybody shows up for these shows. They're very critical to our existence, and I want to invite you to join us to enjoy this show and join us for others in the series sponsored by the Proctors History Committee. Thank you so much.